we went, well, where is a good example of how religious use of ayahuasca works somewhere in the world? Can we point out an example? And as it turns out, Brazil provides an excellent example of how to administer an ayahuasca program, ancestral medicine program. You have to understand that ayahuasca has been around for over 3,500 years, and that's scientifically verified. There are 170 distinct ayahuasca cultures in the Amazon basin that have very rich cosmologies associated with ayahuasca, right? I mean, this predates recorded history.
Hello, I'm your host, Warren, and this podcast is brought to you by MAPS Canada. As MAPS Canada works to support education, research, and advocacy in psychedelic medicine, we recognize that scientific understanding in this field continues to evolve. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical, legal, or professional advice. The views and opinions expressed by host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of MAPS Canada. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Allan Finney. Allan has been working with ayahuasca for the past 10 years in Peru, Mexico, and Canada. He is the founder of Ayahuasca Canada, a nonprofit advocacy group, and the author of Ayahuasca, the Gringo's Guide from Amazonian Ceremonies to New World Facilitators. Allan also founded the Companionship of the Sacred Vine, the only shamanic church ever to receive a legal exemption for ayahuasca under Section 56 of Canada's Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. Though, as we will soon be discussing, the victory was short-lived. Allan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Warren. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about
Wonderful.
this.
So I guess from the start here, for our audience, could you give a little bit of background on the Exemption religion, your church, the Companionship of the Sacred Vine, and where ayahuasca fits into that picture as a religious sacrament?
Sure, yeah. Exemption, you're not going to hear about it. Like if you travel to Peru and sit with Shipibo shamans, which a lot of people associate with traditional ayahuasca ceremonies, or if you sit with the Shuar or Quechua or whatever, chances are you're not going to find out about the religious cosmology of these shamans that you're sitting with. They don't go promoting their religion to people, but they have a rich religious cosmology. So they will give you, what people consider a traditional ayahuasca ceremony, but you're not going to get into their religious belief system behind that unless you specifically start digging in and asking them about it. And even then, you're just going to get as much of that as, they think that you're capable of handling. So, for example, with the Shipibo shamans I work with in Peru, they have a religion called Exemption. And Exemption is similar in some ways to Christianity. There's four worlds in Exemption. There is the non-nete, which is a physical world, the world that we exist in, which is a spiritual world if you understand it. There's the Panshin nete, and nete just means world or place. And that's the underworld, what we would consider in Christianity. Maybe you'd consider that hell, but that's not how it works in Exemption. But for broad strokes, we can say it is. Then there's also the gene nete. And that's a place where you travel to, and all of these are places in the spiritual dimension that human beings can travel to. So the gene nete is where you go to find spiritual allies, anaconda or plant spirits, mapacho animals. So there are spirit helpers that are available to help you as you're traveling through these worlds. And then finally you get to Jacon Nete or Jacon Nete, which is the highest spiritual experience that human beings can have in from the earthly plane. So that's where ego dissolution takes place. That's where you get to experience the divinity of mankind is in the Jegonete. So, that's a quick tour of Exetinete. There's a lot to it, and we could talk about it for days, but that's a sort of a thumbnail sketch for
Sure. And how about your church, Companionship of the Sacred Vine, and sort of where ayahuasca fits into that picture as a religious sacrament?
So, how do we use ayahuasca at the CSV? And that is something that the experts or the people that study this, they call a soul flight or a soul journey, and which the Shipibo shamans would call traveling to one of the worlds of the Exetinete. So let me give you an example. For example, one time I was sitting at an ayahuasca ceremony, and ayahuasca or Mapache, somebody says to me, "Don't waste your time back there." And I'm like, waste my time? And then I am gone to this field of experiences that I had when I was younger. And there was, God, hundreds of them. And so I went into one, and that was one experience that I had. And these are all traumas. They were the ones that I went to were traumas. So anyway, next thing I know, I am at my father's death. And when I was 17, I was the last person to see my father alive. So what had happened was I had gone to the Regina General Hospital on my motorcycle. I went up to see what was going on, and my father's laying there dying in this kind of glassed off room, right? So I'm watching this in horror. I mean, I'm 17 years old, right? And, he's on this gurney palpitating. He was dying. And so I'm standing there in horror, and this nurse comes and sees this and shuts the curtains into this glassed off area, grabs me and ushers me out of there. So in my soul flight or my soul journey, what had happened was I was kind of perched off of my father's shoulder, observing all this and feeling all the emotions of everybody that's involved. So I felt the horror of my 17-year-old self. I felt what was going on with the nurse as she came and ushered me away. And of course, I was feeling what my father is feeling. And so as I'm sitting there and I watch this scene unfold, and I just tell my dad, I said, "Dad, go, end the suffering. Just leave, go, move on." And it was one of the most healing experiences of my life to be able to go back there, because, I had all this anger and resentment, like, why didn't he look after us? All the things that go on with an extreme alcohol environment. So, that was just so profoundly healing for me. I let go of that anger and that resentment, and I understood his suffering by feeling it, and it was just a release. So, so what's the role of the shaman or the facilitator and all this? Is to oversee these soul flights and make sure that everything's okay and that you get back, in one piece. Although everybody comes back. I mean, you always come back. But so the facilitators are to sort of guide this, and, you're there to have these experiences, these soul flight experiences. Within Exetinete, that would be what would be considered traveling to the Panshin Nete, or the underworld. And really, people think, oh my God, the underworld, this horrible place. Well, no, it's not really. It's where you go to do what Jung refers to as shadow work. Those negative things that are affecting you now, so that you can work through them and release them, and off you go. So ayahuasca is the central sacrament. It's how we do the work. It's central to the Companionship of the Sacred Vine to Exemption. I mean, there is no other reason to have an ayahuasca church except, to use ayahuasca. And that's the same thing with Santo Daime or UDV. They exist so that you can use this spiritual medicine. That's the only reason to have an ayahuasca church, is so that you can go in and use that sacrament. Okay, sure. Yeah. In Canada, if you want to, I don't consider myself a criminal. And when I've done ceremonies in Peru, and when I first started doing ceremonies 10 years ago, I go to Peru and everything is open and legal. I come back to Canada. I find out I'm a criminal. So, I started looking into it, and there is something called the Section 56 Religious Exemption Program administered by Health Canada. Now, you're not going to find out about this unless you really dig into it, because there's nothing on their websites. There's no information that's out there, even though they run this program. So the Section 56 program is set up so that you can have access to supposedly illegal substances. It's an exemption under the Canadian Drugs and Substances Act that says, yeah, you guys can possess this. Now, everybody that wants to study, to do work with, so-called illegal drugs, they have to have a Section 56 exemption. So if you're a pharmaceutical company, a medical research company, scientific company, and you want to do research into these drugs, you have to have a Section 56 exemption. And the same thing with any religion that wants access to their sacred substances. If they're illegal, you have to apply for a Section 56 exemption. So in Canada, ayahuasca is illegal. Well, it really isn't, but that's a whole different kettle of fish, legalities around it. But for all intents and purposes, it's illegal. So in order to legally consume ayahuasca in Canada, you have to have this Section 56 exemption. And the Section 56 exemption is location specific. So if you have a church in Montreal or Toronto or wherever, you have to have a specific Section 56 exemption for that location. And there are about 8 or 9 churches in Canada right now that have a Section 56 exemption. Now, these churches are Santo Daime, which is it started in Brazil, or UDV, União de Vegetal, which is also a Brazilian church. And the difference between a shamanic church like the Companionship of the Sacred Vine and these churches is there are no Christian elements in Exemption. I mean, there's similarities, but there's no specific Christian elements in the Companionship of the Sacred Vine. It's what you would consider a traditional ayahuasca ceremony. You sit in front of the shaman, he gives you ayahuasca, you go sit in your mat, he sings Icaros. It's a traditional ceremony. But with the Santo Daime, UDV, it's a completely different ceremony. It's done, and I haven't been to one, but some of my very good friends have come through the Santo Daime tradition or the UDV tradition. And from my understanding, the ceremonies are conducted, with the lights on. The women and the men are separated into 2 different groups. You're walking around in this big circle, you're singing hymns. It's a completely different ceremony than a shamanic or an Exemption traditional ceremony. So in order for us to be legal, we went in and applied for a Section 56 exemption. And this was no small undertaking. We had a dozen people. It took us about the better part of a year to put our application together, to make sure that our Shipibo maestros were on board and in line with what we were doing, and that we had permission to do what we were going to do with the Exemption. So we had a dozen people on the advisory board, Shipibo shamans. We had facilitators from around the world. We had some high-ranking mental health professionals in Canada that were ayahuasqueros as well. Myself, I did the coordination, I did the writing, I'm a writer, so I brought all that together, and it took us a year. So at the end of that year, we submitted our application into the Section 56 exemption program. Now, prior to submitting to the exemption program, I had talked to legal people, and one lawyer who reviewed our application said, "This application is bulletproof, Allan." I says, "Oh, good. This sounds great." He said, "You will never get an exemption for a shamanic church in Canada." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. What do you say?" And like, we weren't paying him. He was just giving us an opinion on it. So that was his opinion. We would never get an exemption for a shamanic ceremonies in Canada. So we put the application in, and for the next 2.5 years, we just got jerked around. It's the best way I can explain it. I come from a bad background. This is the only way I have of explaining it. But we got jerked around by the program people. I mean, we went in sincerely into the Health Canada Section 56, submitted our application, and I mean, there would be months. They would ask us for information, and we'd put in a reply, and months later they would reply to us. And I'm like, what's going on here? That went on for 2.5 years. And just let me explain the difference between, like, if you were a pharmaceutical or a scientific company or a medical company, and you applied for a Section 56 exemption for whatever drug you wanted to study, they have a 75-day service standard. And that means that from the time you put in your completed application, 75 days later, they will make a decision on your application. Once you have the application and you want to make an amendment to it, that's a 45-day process. So we've been in front of Health Canada for 2.5 years. And I'm like, this does not sound like democracy. And it isn't. Under the Canadian-led Declaration of Human Rights, everybody's supposed to have equal access to government services. So 2.5 years later, we said, this is never going to work. They're never going to. In fact, at that time, we had given answers to some of their questions, and we didn't hear anything back from them for 5 months. So we said, at that point, we're like, okay, the writing's on the wall. They're not going to give us an exemption for this. So we went to the political level, and we started doing political lobbying. And when I say political lobbying, we weren't being very nice about it. We're going to sue the federal government to make a decision. It's a branch of law called administrative law. So in order to launch this lawsuit against the federal government, just to make a decision on our application, that's what we want to do, force them to make a decision on our application. We were fundraising, and we had a fundraising website. We had a video. I made a video about it, and I said, look, we want to have 12 churches across. It was a little bit of hype, but I mean, you have to inspire people. So I said, we're going to have 12 churches across Canada, and blah blah blah, and put some money in this so that we can force the government of Canada to make a decision. In the meantime, we're sending emails to the health minister and the top bureaucrats at Health Canada, telling them, look, we're going to sue you guys. We're going to make, there's going to be bad publicity. It's, it's like a carrot and a stick kind of thing, And of course, it was kind of like an old dog sitting on the porch barking, because we really didn't have any bite to the bark. We didn't raise anywhere near the funds that we were going to need to actually launch this lawsuit. But The health minister at the time, I mean, as near as we can figure out, because this is the only way that this could have happened. But the health minister took pity on us and told the program people, hey, give them the exemption. That's the only thing I can figure out, because 2 months after we started the lobbying, we were granted the exemption. And this was after, like I say, 2.5 years. So they gave us the exemption. And we were, as far as I was aware, the only shamanic church in Canada. In fact, the people that I've been talking to previously said they didn't believe that we could have even gotten this exemption for shamanic church, and yet we did.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the permit issue that occurred and why the exemption was effectively useless without that part of it?
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Now, if you want to support and become part of the psychedelic movement, feel free to donate to MAPS Canada at the link in the description below. Thank you for helping our mission to support equitable access to legal and regulated psychedelic medicines for all Canadians.
Right. This is all a big education. Health Canada does not provide you with any information about this, and you just have to sink or swim, learn on the go. So in order to, we could get the legal import permit into Canada. In order to get the flip side of that is it had to be exported legally from Peru. The ayahuasca that we wanted to use in Canada, that has to be legally exported with all the legal paperwork to get it out of the country, right? So we talked to our suppliers in Peru. Oh, yeah, no, we got that paperwork. We got this, we got that. Well, it turns out they didn't have that paperwork, and they were missing parts of the paperwork. So we finally found a supplier that had all the paperwork, and we were working through a customs broker in Peru, and they checked with customs, and yes, this guy can provide the legal documents to export from Peru. Happy day. So we go back to Health Canada. So there's the exemption, and then there's an amendment to an exemption. And we had amended our suppliers a couple times. We had been told by a couple different people, yeah, we can get the legal paperwork, and no, they couldn't. So we had changed our suppliers a couple different times. So now that we found this guy, I asked for him to be put on as our legal exporter out of Peru. And this is where the second problem, big major problem, came up, because they asked me all these questions about, well, why do you need a supplier? I said, well, we have to get legal documents out of Peru. This is the only guy that we can have. And they have, to this day, refused to add that supplier to our exemption. So really, the health minister said, give these guys an exemption. I mean, this is from our perspective. I'm assuming all this happened. You guys get your exemption. You file the amendment to get the legal exporter out of Peru, and they refuse to do that. So the exemption is useless. The exemption, we couldn't use the exemption without having that supplier listed in the exemption, because the legal supplier has to be listed in the exemption for the paperwork for customs. They wouldn't do it. They didn't give us any reason. Every time we inquired, oh, this is under review, blah, blah, blah. Months. It's been about 20 months where they have steadfastly refused to add our legal supplier to our exemption. So we had a useless exemption. There was nothing. We couldn't use the exemption. So let's see, about a little over a year ago, Jamie Larkin, who is now the executive director of Ayahuasca Canada, I think shout out to Jamie. I think he'll be doing a great job because he's a politically astute character. He's got a lot of political connections, which Ayahuasca Canada never had before, or the Companionship of the Sacred Vine never had before. So Jamie Larkin takes and he took a paper that I wrote, a white paper about ayahuasca enforcement, to his buddy, the chief of police in Charlottetown, and said, look it, we want to have legal ceremonies here. Are you guys going to enforce the laws? What are you going to do? He says, there's nothing I can do with that piece of paper. Go take it to city council. So Jamie lined up a presentation at Charlottetown City Council advocating for legal ayahuasca ceremonies in Charlottetown as a wellness hub. There'd be tourism benefits, there'd be benefits for mental health, outlining all the benefits for this. So he goes in front of the Charlottetown City Council and makes his presentation. They do a video of all of the City of Charlottetown presentations. It's on their YouTube channel. So we took that video, we put it on the Ayahuasca Canada YouTube channel, and a little while later, we get a document from Health Canada. They called it an intent to revoke our exemption. And we called it an intent to revoke our useless exemption, but they called it the intent to revoke our exemption. And the basis of this intent to revoke, remember that video I did prior to, when we were going to sue the federal government? And that we had distributed to the federal government and the Health Canada guys. We said, look at this video. We're going to sue you guys. Here's our fundraising video, blah, blah, blah. So in their intent to revoke, they said, this video that Allan Finney did 2.5 years ago, and this video that Jamie Larkin did with Charlottetown, means that our original application obviously was insincere. We weren't sincere when we put in our 60-page application that took a dozen people a year to put together. That's completely insincere, and these 2 videos prove it. Now, my video, I'm one of the people that was involved, obviously, with the application to Health Canada in the first place. Jamie Larkin wasn't even around when we were doing the application. He is a member of the Companionship of the Sacred Vine, but he's not a spokesman, and he had no knowledge of what went on with the application process itself. And Health Canada says, we don't care about that. That video, and Allan Finney's 10-minute video from 2.5 years ago, proves you weren't sincere. We're going to revoke your exemption. You have 2 weeks. Now, this whole process took 2.5 years. They said, you have 2 weeks to respond to our intent to revoke your exemption. As it happens, some people that are sympathetic to what we're doing said, we know one of the top constitutional lawyers in Canada. And I went, yeah, fine. We don't have the money to pay a top constitutional lawyer. Oh, no, we'll pay him. And so at the last day on the 2-week deadline, he goes in and says, we need more time to prepare this. So he prepared this thing was, oh my God, Supreme Court of Canada decisions, CDSA, Canadian Drugs and Substances Act doesn't allow you to revoke an exemption just because you think it's insincere. You have to be in contravention of the terms of your exemption. They list terms in there. Well, we'd never brought ayahuasca into Canada. So obviously we were never in contravention of any of the terms. And they have no authority to just arbitrarily say, no, Anyway, it was a whole big, long legal submission. It was huge. And as far as religious rights, so, if I self-declare as a Catholic, let's say, right? Or you declare yourself Jewish or Protestant or whatever, the government of Canada isn't going to say, oh, no, you're not, prove it. That's, That's your faith. That is your internal state. You get to say what that is. So us saying that we are members of the Exemption religion is beyond the scope of the government of Canada to say, no, you're not. You're insincere. It'd be like if I was a Catholic, they'd come to me and say, well, you're a good Catholic? Do you go to Mass every Sunday? Do you, when was the last time you went to confession? It's ridiculous. It's your internal state, right? So, but that's what they did. They said, you guys aren't sincere. Now, we'd submitted a 60-page document in our application. And so, naturally enough, in legal process, the Crown or the government is supposed to give you their disclosure as to how they came to this charge, right? And so our lawyer, thinking that they're going to work through legal processes, like common legal processes, asked for disclosure. Nothing. They refused to give him disclosure on this intent to revoke document. Didn't tell him why, didn't tell us why, just said, oh, well, these videos prove that you're well, it was a 60-page exemption. What part of the videos were in contravention of which parts of the 60-page application so that we can prepare a defense, right? Or prepare a submission anyway. And nope, sorry, you're just, out of luck. We're taking away your useless exemption. So that's eventually 2 months later, and I mean, this just gets bizarre. 2 months later, no, they'd given us a 2-week deadline to submit. 2 months later, they come back to us and say, do you have anything else to add to your original submission? It's like, you gave us 2 weeks, and now 2 months later, you're asking us, do you want to say anything else? And our lawyer says, no, we submitted everything we were going to submit. And a couple of months after that, they sent us a document revoking our exemption. Now, here's, when we're dealing with the Section 56 people, it's anonymous. The whole thing is anonymous. You submit your information into their anonymous email address, and you get a reply back, no name. You don't know who you're dealing with. It just says Section 56, Exemption Department, blah, blah, blah. So when the exemption was actually issued, it was signed and issued by the Director General of Health Canada, Section 56 program. Her name was on it. She signed the thing. We knew who granted the exemption, right? The intent to revoke, nobody signed it. Nobody, it just come out of their anonymous email program. Here, who did this? Who is this? And, there's a Government of Canada trust and transparency policy that says, we're fully transparent in how we do things. And I'm like, really? That doesn't sound very transparent to me. So eventually, the person that responded to the intent to revoke was at a director level. And I had known from her previous work, she had previously been an acting director general. She was now at a director level. And that was the person that was responding to our lawyer's submission. So, this was done at a director level, I believe. I mean, this was done at a director level within the Health Canada Section 56 program. And that's where this came from. So, who authorized that? We don't know. We still don't know. Nobody bothered to sign their name to this thing. We have no idea who issued the intent to revoke. We have no idea who issued the revocation of the exemption.
And so you have no point of contact, no person. You have not heard anything back from them since. That was the last of the contact that you've had with Health Canada?
Yep, your exemption, your useless exemption is hereby revoked. Too bad. Better luck next time. that, all anonymous, all done anonymously. Um, it's like this is kind of the Cole's Note version or the thumbnail sketches, because there's a lot to this, but that's essentially 6 years of my life, and 5 years of babysitting this through the Section 56 program, and that's been the end result of it. No ayahuasca.
This was about a year ago, you said, that the exemption was revoked?
Let's see, the revocation in December, January, February, March. I think about 6 months ago, if memory serves. But I mean, it was useless anyway. It was useless since the day they issued it. We couldn't use it. There was no way that the health minister, and again, from my perspective, the health minister ordered the bureaucracy, or the program people to issue the exemption. And then, however that happened, somebody at a director level, somebody at a middle management level said, no, no, we're not playing ball with you guys, or however that came about, I don't know. It's, but again, here you have the highest political level in Canada telling the program people to do something. They don't care. We'll do whatever we want, So that's the way I look at it in my embittered state.
To your knowledge, have any of the Christian-based ayahuasca churches had any sort of difficulty with the process like this, with importation permits, anything like that?
Well, I don't have direct knowledge of that, but I know people that have been in their associations and stuff, and from what they're telling me, they don't have any problems getting ayahuasca into Canada. And just in that regard, the first ayahuasca church in Canada that was ever approved was Santo Daime Church in Montreal. It took them 17 years to get their initial exemption. 17 years that they kept moving this forward through Section 56 program people, and 17 years to get that. And, our administrative law lawyer, I've gotten an education in Canadian law and how these processes work and that sort of thing. But Supreme Court of Canada, Supreme Court of Canada ruling number 29 says that it is an abusive process for program level people to unduly delay their process. In other words, they can't just sit on a decision. They're supposed to make a decision within a reasonable time frame. Well, I'd argue 17 years is not a reasonable time frame. I'd argue that 2.5 years is not a reasonable time frame, given that you have a service standard of 75 days under the same program for pharmaceutical applications or science or medical applications. They're all serviced. In fact, when you get an email from the Section 56 program, anonymous, of course, because it's always anonymous, they will tell you, we've got this program, we got that, but they do not mention the religious exemption program in there. There's nothing on their websites, So here you're paying people good money to do this. Anyway, so that's been our experience with the Section 56 people, and it hasn't been what we were expecting.
Sounds like it. I guess given all of that experience, what sort of changes would you make to the Section 56 exemption program in regards to religious exemptions, and why?
Sure. And that's a very good question. And, when we are going to make recommendations, we're putting together a document right now. But when we do something, we like to do our research. We like to understand what the issues are. We don't go off half-cocked. It took us a year. It was very smart people to put together that exemption application. So we went, well, where is a good example of how religious use of ayahuasca works somewhere in the world? Can we point out an example? And as it turns out, Brazil provides an excellent example of how to administer an ayahuasca program, ancestral medicine program. You have to understand that ayahuasca has been around for over 3,500 years, and that's scientifically verified. There are 170 distinct ayahuasca cultures in the Amazon basin that have very rich cosmologies associated with ayahuasca, right? I mean, this predates recorded history. So in the 1970s, the United Nations says, wow, this DMT stuff, that sure looks like it might have potential for abuse. We're going to criminalize it. And they didn't criminalize ayahuasca. In fact, they specifically excluded ayahuasca. But they criminalized extracted DMT, which all the countries said, oh, well, ayahuasca must be DMT. Anyway, so this was the situation that Brazil was facing. So in the 1980s, they struck these committees, and for 20 years, they studied the issues around ayahuasca use, ancestral medicines in general, safety, how ayahuasca is used in traditional indigenous cultures, how ayahuasca is used in traditional religious ceremonies and programs. And at the end of that 20-year process, Brazil says, we're no longer in the business of regulating ancestral medicines in Brazil. Now, Brazil has the Amazon rainforest, of course, so, it's a more immediate thing. But so they said, no, we're not regulating this anymore. Thanks. It's, we're not going to prosecute anybody. We're not going to regulate. If people start dying or whatever, there can be criminal investigations or whatever. So that was in 2010. So for the last 16 years, 2010, 15, 2020, yeah, 16 years, the ayahuasca has been legal for religious use in Brazil, and society didn't fall apart, and pharmaceutical industry profits didn't drop. In fact, Brazil is one of the most robust pharmaceutical industry markets in South America, one of the fastest growing. So really, ayahuasca wasn't even a drop in the bucket. It was, the estimates right now are that there are 1,000 ayahuasca churches in Brazil. And nobody's dying. There's no violence. In Brazil, you can attend a Buddhist ayahuasca ceremony, a Christian-based ayahuasca ceremony, Hindu-based ayahuasca ceremony, Urubamba ayahuasca ceremony, syncretic ceremonies with blends of Christianity. They all get along together. There's no problem with it. There's all kinds of ayahuasca centers in Brazil. But here's the thing with ayahuasca. It will never be mainstream medicine. Never. It never will, because of how it works. So a pharmaceutical industry medicine, take this and hopefully you'll get better. But ayahuasca is spiritual medicine. This is not a romp through some daisies and golden fields of Buddha, or whatever. It's a serious undertaking. Ayahuasca is it's a spiritual medicine. So what do I mean by spiritual medicine? So, for example, very good associate of mine, very good friend, Reverend Richard Brandel, he is known for working with veterans. So, Canadian Armed Forces psychologist underground, because it's all illegal, referred 7 special forces soldiers to Rick and said, can you give these guys an ayahuasca ceremony? He said, yeah, I can do that for you. So he had 7 veterans with suicidal ideation. I mean, veterans were killing themselves left, right, and center, right? So between all of these 7 veterans, they had close to 600 confirmed kills. And I go, Rick, what kind of a ceremony was that? He says, as we get into the ceremony, because the shaman or the facilitator also takes ayahuasca and enters into the spiritual dimensions, right? So as he is conducting the ceremony, he said all 600 of these spirits showed up in this ceremony and were trying to get these veterans to kill themselves. And I went, what did you do? He says, I had to clear all of this energy. And that's what he did. Now, how he did that, I don't know. I mean, these are facilitators. They've worked with, Rick's worked with the medicine for 20 some years, did a 10-year apprenticeship. They know what they're doing, right? So he said, I cleared it. And each one of those veterans turned their lives around. No more suicidal ideation, no more, that's, par for the course. Myself, I've been dealing with undiagnosed dissociative disorder my entire life, the aftermath of an alcoholic upbringing. I was not in good shape, but when I was 59 years old, and I started taking ayahuasca, and I'd looked at it into everything in my life, from when I quit drinking and drugging when I was 29 years old to when I was 59 years old. Every self-help modality, Buddhism, meditation, Bradshaw and the Family, AA, adult children of alcoholics, blah, blah, everything. And it all helps to some degree, but it didn't get the relief that I was looking for. I went to a month of ceremonies in the Amazon jungle, and I'd found the key to my soul. And anybody doesn't think that ayahuasca is a sacred undertaking, I'll say, here, come on over to my place. I'll give you a drink of this tea. And then after you're done that ceremony, you tell me, anyway, so, a month of ceremonies, and I thought, wow, I'm good. I'm great. I did 5 years of ceremonies, continual ceremonies. I had chances to do it. I was at a point in my life where it was like, do this or wind up like those veterans, and I just dove in. 5-year process, cleared it, and the difference between medical intervention, like if I'd gone to psychiatric or medical intervention, here, take these antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, what have you, right? The Shipibo cosmology says, oh, your soul was shattered when you were a child, and we have to reassemble it. So that was the process of what I was doing through those 5 years, was reassembling my soul. And, unless your doctor, this is why ayahuasca will never be mainstream medicine, and it will never fit into a pharmaceutical model, because all of these ceremonies are guided by a facilitator who is trained in navigating those spiritual dimensions. And they help you, they don't cure you, they help you work through those processes and understand what happened to you, and understand how to undo it, and understand how you're constructed as a human being, and how to deconstruct those parts of yourself that that are not serving you at this time. So how are you going to put that in a bottle? How are you going to get a prescription for that type of thing? And the only way to do it, the only way for me to practice my religion legally, which, like I say, I'm not a criminal, the only way to do it, is through this exemption program, Section 56 exemption program. And it's not like I'm a threat to society. And even in that regard, like my daughter and my daughter came along on my second trip to Peru. We've done 100 ayahuasca ceremonies together. I'm giving this to my daughter, and I have to understand what it is I'm working with. How is this safe? Or is it carcinogen? What is this stuff, right? And so the people that understand ayahuasca, the highest authority in the world on ayahuasca is an organization called ICEERS, International Center for Ethnobotanical Education and Research. They're the acknowledged experts of ayahuasca. They are a United Nations consultative non-governmental organization. They know what they're talking about. So ayahuasca has a safety profile. And if you know what you're doing, which the facilitators in Canada, there's a network of facilitators in Canada that all have done apprenticeships in Peru, apprenticeships with maestros here, and understand how this medicine works on a spiritual level, physical level, psychological level. These aren't, if you're a, the mainstream narrative says, oh, these are just irresponsible people taking these drugs and hallucinating. And I'm like, yeah, right. You have no idea what you're talking about. Because let's say, Warren, somebody decided, oh yeah, I'm going to cash in on this ayahuasca craze, goes down to Peru, gets some ayahuasca, yeah, let's, you drink the ayahuasca. It's not going to turn out well for you, quite honestly, because when you take ayahuasca, you meet the spirit of ayahuasca. And, it's not just me saying that. You look at listening to Ayahuasca by Rachel Harris, PhD. Story after story of people that take ayahuasca. You meet the spirit of ayahuasca. I certainly did in my first ceremony. This is I'd say 98, 99% of the people that take ayahuasca come back and report the same thing. So if you think that and you have to approach this medicine with humility, or you're going to have a rough time of it. And if somebody thinks they're just going to cash in on something like this, they're dreaming in Technicolor. It takes a traditional Shipibo apprenticeship is 9 years, where they're working with their maestros, and at the end of the 9 years, they may or may not be given permission to serve the medicine. So, this is not a this is not something we thought up behind the barn last night and decided to go make some money selling ayahuasca.
Perfect. Well, I think we're coming to an end here. Was there anything else that you wanted to add? Anything for our audience to know? Final word if you want to.
Oh my God, we could be here for days. Get me going on topics. But, here's the question that we're posing here. Is there room in Canadian society for this obscure type of ceremony going on? Because it'll never be mainstream. Do we have enough tolerance in Canadian society to say, yeah, let's follow the Brazilian model. Let's allow these people to work with their ancestral medicine. I mean, ayahuasca improves lives. If you look at long-term longitudinal studies, there's an 11,500 person long-term longitudinal study that looked at regular ayahuasca drinkers, many of them from Santo Daime and other churches and that sort of thing. They are healthier by all indications. They have better mental health indicators. They are more family oriented, more society oriented. And when you look at that, ayahuasca builds better citizens. You can take a veteran with PTSD and get them out of their suicidal ideation. You can take an addict, properly prepared, will give up their drug of choice in one ayahuasca ceremony. Now, again, everybody's not going to do that, but for the people that want to have that available, what's the problem? I don't know. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I really appreciate this.
I appreciate you taking your time to speak with us, and thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Okay. You as well.
Take care.
Bye-bye.